Good evening, everyone. My friends that I can see and my friends that I can't see in virtual land. Welcome to our, I believe it's our fourth night?
Sixth night.
Sixth night.
Yeah.
Our sixth night of Healthy Brain, Broken Brain Symposium. We are indeed blessed to have Dr. Barry Wecker with us and for him providing the wonderful knowledge, tips and tricks, information for us that will help us, has already been helping some of us, holistically, spiritually, physically, and emotionally, and in every way. I'll just share a little bit of information with you about Dr. Wecker, just in case you haven't heard. Dr. Wecker was born in Saskatchewan, but has been practicing family medicine for the last 46 years, 35 of which were spent in New Brunswick. We won't hold that against you.
No, that's right. It's a good place.
Dr. Wecker is a traveler. He's been to 165 of the world's 196 countries.
I'm gonna add one
Wow.
more shortly. We've got doing a seminar in South Sudan in January.
Okay.
So that'll be a new one.
Oh, wow. Well, I'll see if maybe I can
Get over to South Sudan. We'll do something.
Alrighty. Okay, awesome. He lived cumulatively in Rwanda and Kenya, East Africa, and Côte d'Ivoire, which is in West Africa, for 7 years. Most people who pursue an MPH, Master's in Public Health degree, have strong interest in prevention medicine and the public good. Dr. Wecker is one of those people. He is married with 4 adult children and 1 wife. Yes, one wife, okay. Today, we are so very grateful that he has chosen to be with us to share his vast knowledge base. And I would like to add that from what you've been sharing with us, I have gathered from some of our participants that they have been implementing some, of what you said. So I'm going to share them with you.
Okay.
Someone told me that they've added Brazil nuts to their
selenium.
diet. They went and bought a whole bunch of nuts, but instead of taking 1 Brazil nut, they took 2.
That's fine.
That's okay?
That's fine.
Okay, so that's okay. Yeah, that's okay. All right. Another person is exercising in the morning instead of in the afternoon. I'm going to mention Mo's name because he's my friend. He has said that he is using the ginger, turmeric, cinnamon, and cayenne pepper. Yes.
As an anti-inflammatory.
As an anti-inflammatory.
Good.
Thank you.
Good.
Yes. And I am proud to share with you that since Tuesday, so Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I have had 55 different plant-based foods.
Wow. Congratulations.
Yeah. Can you believe it?
No, I can't.
I can't believe it either. I can't believe it either.
So you got a very healthy bioflora developing.
Just in case you were going to dispute it, I have kept track.
Oh, good. Excellent. Excellent.
Yes,
Excellent.
in case anybody want to dispute it. I have it written down.
Good show.
All right. Okay. So,
thank you, Sharon.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wecker. I give you Dr. Wecker.
Good. Well, I think that if we start just adding some of these plant things into our diet, I always tell people, don't focus on what you can't eat, okay? That becomes so negative. just start adding some of the extra ones on that you can eat. And that's how some of the dietary changes take place. And be explorative with your food. I have a niece who was in a restaurant with me recently, and she told the waitress, she said, "Well, I'm a vegetarian." And my wife added, "She's a vegetarian who has never tasted a vegetable in her life." Because all she eats is pasta and potatoes. Oh, challenging. My grandson was born with an intestinal malrotation, and at a very young age had to have surgery, which is another long story. And he's a pretty poor eater as well, and my daughter and I are very concerned about his long-term health. But he's now 13, and I can talk to him and discuss it with him. And maybe we will see some changes, but he's a real hard one to crack. There's a lot of emotional tying into his food fears. He actually gets almost like a panic disorder when he has to try something he's never eaten before. Tonight, we're going to be talking about two health problems that are common, but a little bit mysterious. In the sense that we don't understand them well, and there's still a lot of research that needs to be done on them. But I think that the benefit from discussing them tonight is just going to be to help you understand these two disease, and they're not really diseases alone, they're sort of disease combinations, maybe I'll say, and we'll explain them a little bit better here. But our first one is going to be ADHD, and that stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. See, I got to turn this on now. There's an on button somewhere here. I found it the other night. It's on the side? Yeah, right here. Okay. There we go. Okay, so attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And this disease is a chronic neurodevelopmental disorder which affects 1.5 million Canadians. So if we take our population at being, what are we now, about 40 million, 45 million maybe? I forget what the current statistic is. 1.5 million is like 1 in 30. Okay, a fairly significant problem. And left untreated, ADHD can have a rather devastating effect on one's life. And I'm going to give you a little bit of statistics of how it affects people's lives. It can shorten one's life expectancy by up to 22 years if it leaves untreated into adulthood. It reduces the number of healthy years by 8.4 is what they average. 80% of adults and 44% of children with ADHD also have another mental health disorder. 32.2% of students with ADHD do not graduate from high school. Adults with ADHD are 20% less likely to be employed, and they earn 16% less than their counterparts. 33% of our inmates in Canadian prisons have ADHD. It's pretty astounding. Individuals with ADHD are 45% more likely to be involved in a serious motor vehicle accident. Adults with ADHD are 10 times more likely to visit their physician, and they have higher emergency department visits as well. ADHD adults are twice as likely to be divorced and are less satisfied with their personal, social, and professional lives. So this disorder, and I will call it a disorder rather than a disease, this disorder, it has a significant impact on people. It's becoming very, very common. As I told you one other evening, it's rare that I see a child in my office who does not have some degree of hyperactivity disorder anymore. Very rare. So we had an old term that we used. So it affects 1.5 million Canadians. The old term that we used to use was ADD, Attention Deficit Disorder. We have scratched that term now, and we're only referring to all of it as ADHD. It encompasses everything, okay? And so we have three different forms of this. The first one is the inattentive ADHD. And these children are easily distracted. They struggle to learn new information. They resist tasks that require mental energy, and they're regularly losing their belongings. And I'm going to list in just a minute all the different symptoms and how we make a diagnosis of that. And then we have the hyperactive impulsive ADHD. Always squirming and fidgeting, always on the go, difficulty taking turns, and I'll give you another list of some of those in just a second here. And then the third one is a combination of those two, where they can't focus, they can't keep their attention on things. And I'm getting more and more people coming into my office every week, children and adults, who have taken self-tests online. And they come in and they say, I think this is my problem. And many of them are people that I have been working with for depressive illnesses, anxiety disorders, other aspects, behavioral, anger management disorders. I got one young man who I've known since he was a little boy, and his parents used to bring him in regularly because he had gotten so angry with his sister, he'd punched holes in the walls, was breaking down the house, doors were being broken down. He's now an adult. He has an auto body business. And I said to him, how are you doing in your business? He said, well, I got lots of work, but I just can't keep my focus in order to get anything done. I'm not productive. I said, oh, okay. So as we talked, I got him to do a self-examination too, and it turns out that he's very strongly ADHD, and I've missed it for 25 years in seeing him. Another lady came to see me. She was a person I've known also since she was a teenager. She went to school with some of my kids. And the first time I'd met her, she came in with a teenage pregnancy. And I delivered her baby. And then she moved away, went out west, and ultimately has come back. And she asked if she could see me again. She's been on chronic anxiety medications for her entire life. She's been on numerous antidepressants, numerous anti-anxiety meds. And we sat down in the office one day, and I just went through with her the difficulties she's having with her job. And I finally said, you know what? I don't think you've been treated correctly over these years. I think your problem is ADHD. And so we stopped all the anxiety meds, all the antidepressant meds, and got her going on a program for ADHD. And she's finally being productive in her life. She says, I now feel better than I felt in years. So it sneaks up on you. So the primarily inattentive ADHD, in order to make the diagnosis, a child has to have 6 of these symptoms. Okay, so that's sort of an arbitrary rule. We say 6 of them. Difficulty sustaining attention, often seeming not to be listening, failing to pay attention to details, difficulty organizing tasks, frequently losing things, getting easily distracted, forgetfulness, avoiding tasks that require sustained mental effort, and trouble following instruction. So those are the ones that we used to call ADD. Then for our next section, we've got the impulsive hyperactive ones. These are the kids that just can't stay still. You can't keep them in a chair. And for them, it's once again 6 out of this list that you make the diagnosis with. Fidgeting hands and feet or squirming while seated, running or climbing inappropriately, restless. I've had children that I have to, when I have them in the office, I will sit on the chair, I will stick them between my knees, and I will hold them like this when they're in the room, because you can't have a discussion with anybody. The mother comes in and the kid's into everything. So I just hold them down, hold them tight, and then they squirm and wiggle and say, no, in this office, you've got to sit quiet. And it requires physically restraining the kid. Now, as they get bigger, I can't do that because they'll probably restrain me, but anyhow. Difficulty engaging in activities quietly, seeming to be always on the go, excessive talking, blurting out responses, problems taking turns, inability to stay seated, and frequently interrupting others. And then the third type is a combination of these two, and that's diagnosed by having 6 of both of the lists. So these are the different types of this. Now, as I said, it's quite common. Interestingly enough, it affects out of 3 to 10% of children, but it's 3 times more common in boys than girls. And I find that the hyperactivity comes even more boys rather than girls. Now, the Ontario Child Health Study reported ADHD in 6.1% of children between the ages of 4 and 16. And the Quebec Mental Health Survey found 5.4 of the children, but they had a narrower range. They had from 6 to 14. So we're dealing with, 1 in 12 children with this problem. Drives teachers in the school crazy. Frequently, the teachers are coming to see me with their diagnosis of it because they just can't handle the students in the school. So we don't know what the cause of this is. There are several ideas. We do feel that there is some form of brain injury, maybe with birth, that involves some children. We do know that toxins that a mother takes in during pregnancy or that a child takes in their early years are probably related to this. And I don't know if I shared with you the study already or whether I will be doing it maybe tomorrow night, but they have taken cord blood from when babies are delivered, and they have identified well over 100 different toxic substances in the cord blood. And many of these are known to be damaging to the brain. So we are just exposed to a toxic soup constantly, and it just really behooves a pregnant mom to really be very careful with everything, with her food, what she's exposed to. I remember when we were getting ready to move to Rwanda, I'd found a barrel to pack some stuff in. We were going to pack dishes and everything in it. And when we opened the barrel, there was some powder in it. And so my wife and I were with our head down in this barrel, cleaning this barrel out. And then I read the label, and it was some form of toxic poison. And I looked at my wife and I said, "I'll bet you're pregnant too." And she said, "No, I don't think so." I said, "You wait, we're going to do a pregnancy test tomorrow, but I'll bet you are." And sure enough, she was in the earliest stages of pregnancy. And I fretted about that for the entire pregnancy, that exposure to something toxic. So we're exposed to it. We do know that alcohol and tobacco during pregnancy is a risk factor. We do know that premature births increase the proportions of children with ADHD. Low birth weight, which frequently comes with alcohol and tobacco use as well, along with poor nutritional status in pregnancy. Some of the things that we're researching right now are dealing with nutritional deficiencies. There's always been a concern that artificial coloring agents, food colorings, may play a factor, artificial preservatives. When you start reading what's in a package of food and you can't pronounce 3/4 of the things that are in it, you know there's trouble. The leaky gut syndrome is definitely a factor, and we're finding that that's being more and more of a factor. And of course, the toxins that we absorb that we've talked about with several other things. So what can we do with a kid with ADHD? Well, the medical treatment is always to give them, yes? I wonder about that too, because I do know that those mental health issues influence the genome, the genetic makeup of the unborn child. And we do know that if a mother does not have a peaceful, quiet, relaxed pregnancy, that the child, may have some problems later. And I think there's probably a very strong correlation there. So, women who are in domestic abuse situations, who are poor and maybe single moms, don't have a support mechanism, they're all at risk for that. So yes, prenatal influences. I think prenatal influences are very strong with this particular problem. So if you go into the, we've already gone through symptoms, so I don't have to stick with that one. So if you go to a physician with ADHD, the first thing they're going to do is prescribe a stimulant, such as Ritalin or Concerta, or there are about 4 or 5 of them that are used. These stimulants do make a difference, okay, and they do provide better control for children. I try to, if I have to prescribe it, I tell them to only take it during school months and to take a vacation from it over the course of the summer. Many children, we can get them off of this medication, but some continue taking it through adulthood. I'm concerned about the use of some of these stimulant medications. Yes? Start them as soon as they start school. And because unfortunately, if they're severely affected by ADHD, they are not going to they require one-on-one attention all the time in the school. They cannot function in a school setting. Now, I had one young boy, and this mother has 2 children. The first one was definitely an impulsive hyperactive ADHD from the start go. I remember, these little spring door stops that are behind doors. Well, the moment he gets into an exam room, he's, clinging that one nonstop. And there will nothing that will get me going faster than to hear that going, cling, 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 cling. Boy, I took off into the exam room. That was one time he's one kid that I've had to just hold down, just absolutely hold down. But we've got him in school now, and he is not on medication, and the school setting has been very, very positive for this kid, and he's learning fine. So when I did some evaluations of his home situation, father provided discipline when he was home. Mother provides no limitations, no restrictions to anything the child does or eats. None, 0. So the school situation, he's had some limits placed on him, and children need limits. And he's doing better. Now, his younger brother is now 6 years old. He's starting school this year. He only says 2 words. So we're going to be talking about him in our second section. So here's a mom with 2 children, one with hyperactive, poor control ADHD, impulsive ADHD, and the other one with autism. And I'm wondering about genetic, factors. I do know the whole family's involved, both parents, and there were maybe some genetic predispositions too, but I'm sure that there's a toxin-related issue, and there's definitely a food-related issue. So the things that I recommend are that, number one, we try a gluten elimination, because gluten is a protein that punches holes in our guts. It's one of the causes of leaky gut syndrome. And that's not just because of the glyphosate on it, but it's also related to the gluten itself. So one of the things I do is I try getting them off of gluten. We also try getting them off of highly processed foods. If they can get on as natural of a food program as possible, with lots of organic, natural produce, they do much better. And in order to do this, we get the kid involved in the kitchen, so they're involved with, and I find that many times if I train that child, I can train the child easier than I can the parents in how to do the food. And sometimes if I work with the school and the teacher, as well as myself with nutritional education, the children come home and they start telling their parents how to eat and what they're supposed to eat and what they're not supposed to eat. And it's sort of counterintuitive, but it's working better that way. Sugar intake, the amount of sugar that is put into children is amazing. They're given, pop constantly, and juice. They think juice is better, but juice has the same sugar content that pop does. Frequently, it's added fructose in it too, which is another substance we'll talk about before we're finished this series. We got to reduce the sugar intake. Avoid as much as possible food additives, preservatives, and artificial colors. Avoid neurotoxins such as MSG and artificial sweeteners. And artificial sweeteners are pervasive in the food industry. You read the labels, and I am absolutely shocked at how many they're added into, even if it doesn't say diet on it. So you got to read the labels. And then I encourage a lot of the cruciferous vegetables to help with detox, healthy fats to provide optimal brain health, adequate sleep. I don't know how parents can survive if kids don't go to bed until 11 o'clock at night, but we looked forward to 8 o'clock because it was the time when we had some peace of mind in our household. Now, a funny little story on that front. When we moved to Rwanda, first of all, we had no 24-hour electricity on the mission compound. So we only had a generator from 6 p.m. until 9 p.m. But we were all exhausted at the end of the day, and I don't know that there was more than 1 or 2 nights that we were up when the generator went off. And before long, we were recognizing that we were not having any family time because I'd come home from the hospital, we had supper, the kids were all yawning and wanted to go to bed, and we wanted to go to bed, and so we did not have any family time. So I passed a rule in the house that nobody could go to bed before 9 o'clock. And we had a student missionary that came to join us a couple years later, and he, of course, was jet-lagged after a time change, and we wanted to go to bed early, and all the kids said to him, "No, there's a rule in this house. Nobody goes to bed before 9 o'clock. He said, "What? That's the stupidest rule I've ever heard of." But we had to work at keeping our kids up in order to have some time with them. But, of course, they all played quite hard, too. But I see children who are up until 11, 12 o'clock, and when I go to Egypt, I'm always astounded because, of course, it's hot in the daytime, so life starts at dark. and you're driving down a street in Cairo and it's midnight, and there are families having picnics out on the boulevards of all the streets, and all the children are playing and the playgrounds are going, and it's midnight. And I just think, oh my, when are you ever going to get some sleep? And then last of all, eliminate as much as possible, or not eliminate. You can't do it in this day and age. Limit screen time. We have too much screen time. And with movies and things on the screen, it decreases the attention span of a child. And one researcher that I have heard said that now children have an attention span that's less than that of a goldfish. They just got to have constant changes, constant, new ideas. They can't read through anything. And I'm finding myself doing somewhat similar as I go through news and everything. I often am not able to get to the end of the article. I just sort of skim through it and then I'm on to the next one. I think, oh, I got to be able to at least keep my attention until I get through the entire news article. So limiting screen time will be helpful too. There are some practitioners who, that's the first thing they do, is they tell the child that they need a 2-week screen holiday before they start even working with them. The thing that we need to remember is there's no such thing as a broken child. Each child is gifted in some area of the brain. Never give up on a child. There's always hope. And sometimes we have to work extra hard to bring this out, but we need to never give up on a child. And I have great respect for teachers, especially teachers who teach the youngest grades. They have a tremendous influence in a child's life, and I think they really deserve a lot of credit. Okay, so any other questions on ADHD? Anything that you don't understand or would like to ask? We can pick up some more towards the end. So we'll move on to autism, autism spectrum disorder. And this is even more nebulous of a disease. Up until the 1960s, it was believed that autism was a parenting disorder. We now know that it's a multifactorial disorder, which includes a genetic predisposition. It involves some neurobiological components, environmental components, and there are toxins that are involved too with this. People with autistic spectrum disorder behave, communicate, interact, and learn in ways that are different from most other people. There is often nothing about how they look that sets them apart from others. And the abilities of a person with autism spectrum disorder can vary. There are some that are very, very talented, gifted in certain areas, but their ability to communicate, relate, is definitely limited. Now, Asperger's syndrome is a variety of autism spectrum disorder. I have a young man in my practice who is a whiz with computers. I usually get him to come and help me with my computers if my boys can't do it. And he has Asperger's syndrome. He struggles, he frequently takes a long time to get the problem solved, but he gets the problem solved, and he's actually quite bright with it. So he has some gifts in that area, even though he struggles with interpersonal relationships and communication. Now, his father has severe, severe dementia, and I'm not sure how those two are going to relate. So some people with autism spectrum disorder may have advanced conversational skills. Others are nonverbal. Some people with ASD need a lot of help with their daily lives. Others can live and work without support. Autism spectrum disorder usually begins around the age of 3, and it lasts for the person's entire life. Sometimes the symptoms improve over time. So we really have 4 different components to this. We have 4 or 5, I guess, listed here. We have the autistic disorder, Asperger's syndrome, a childhood disintegrative disorder, Rett's disorder, and a pervasive developmental disorder, which isn't specified. It's a collection of a whole variety of things that we have put into one basket, but we don't understand well any of it, and we're learning a fair amount. As far as its prevalence, it affects about 1 child in every 68. The first signs usually appear by the age of 2, and a lot of people are looking at the fact that there could be toxins to the mother while she's pregnant, or toxins in the early child's life. It transcends all racial groups, it transcends all ethnic groups, all socioeconomic groups, and once again, it's 4 times more common in boys than girls. For whatever reason, I don't know. It may be the genetic part of that. And ultimately, we may actually be combining this with ADHD, and it will form a big global disorder altogether. I don't know that for sure. So here's some of the warning symptoms of autism spectrum disorder. The child that doesn't want, whoa, I didn't mean to do that. Let me go back. The child that doesn't want to be cuddled or doesn't want to be touched. The child that just doesn't respond. There's some that are intolerant to sounds, loud noises bother them. They tiptoe everywhere, difficulty sleeping. They may have some hyperactivity, maybe depressed, withdrawn. Some have little spells we think maybe like epilepsy. Sometimes they will have hysterics and they will get anger outbursts, or they'll sit with repetitive actions. Many different behavioral components. There's no medical test for it. There's no blood test you can use to diagnose it. So what we do is we look at the total behavior picture, and if I'm suspicious of it in my office, I will get a pediatrician to confirm my suspicion. So I have some pediatricians that I refer to, and I get them to help. Sometimes children will not get a final diagnosis until they're older, and some people are not even diagnosed with this until they're adolescents or adults. But this delay means that frequently they don't get the help that they need either. So the risk factors for it, there's no one cause and there's not one variety or type of autism. Risk factors that we are aware of. If a sibling has ASD, the chances are higher that another sibling will. It tends to run in families. But that does not necessarily mean it's genetic, because families eat the same and families are exposed to the same toxins. We do know that there are multiple chromosomal differences if we analyze a person's genome. And there are several different chromosomes that are involved. Sometimes we see this with birthing complications, but that doesn't always follow through. Sometimes we see this more commonly in babies born to older parents, but that doesn't always follow through either. It was first described in about 1940, and gradually we're just getting to understand the disease a little bit better. We now feel that it is a metabolic processing disorder of the brain. There's something taking place in the brain. And like I said, probably 100 different genes that seem to contribute to this. But 95 to 100% of children with autism also have an intestinal dysfunction. So I'm convinced that there is something to do with the intestinal biome that plays a factor. 70% have a weakened immune system. So I think that rather than looking at it as just a brain disease, we need to look at it as a total body disease. We need to help the body regain its balance because the brain is just an integral part of the entire body. When there's an inflamed gut, substances pass through the gut, they enter the bloodstream, it causes inflammation of the brain, that breaks down the blood-brain barrier. And so many things trigger this chaos. And we have, I'll come back to this one here. Let's see, no, I had another slide that says, genetics load the pistol, but environmental factors pull the trigger. And so we're thinking that maybe environmental factors may contribute up to 60% of this disorder. Only 40% are genetic. And the study that I was referring to about the cord blood, in the study of umbilical cord blood, they have found 280 toxic chemicals. But we don't know what the effects of all these chemicals are on the fetus. So while we don't really know exactly the cause, we got to look at all the different factors that play a role. And I have a little saying here that says, remember that if you sit on a nail, it'll take a lot of Tylenol to get rid of the pain. The treatment for a nail in your butt is to pull the nail out. And if you sit on two nails, you will not get 50% improvement by pulling out one. So we've got to look at this as a total picture, and we've got to be working with nutritional balancing, improving gut health, decreasing inflammation, a total picture of health to improve the level of functioning with autism spectrum disorder. And it's not just one profession that gets involved with this. We have psychologists involved, social workers involved. We have neurobiologists in pediatric hospitals. We have a variety of people who contribute to the well-being of these children: nutritionists, physiotherapists, occupational therapists. And but here I've put a list here of the things that I recommend to families who have a child who has an autistic spectrum disorder. So the first thing is a diet. I recommend a healthy, plant-based diet, rich in micronutrients, rich in color, along with some vitamins and supplements. And the vitamins and supplements that I recommend are vitamin B12, vitamin B6, which is pyridoxine. I'll give you a little side on pyridoxine. Nausea and vomiting in pregnancy is largely related to the fact that the placenta, as it's developing, consumes enormous amounts of vitamin B6. And so what I do, I have a little witch's formula that nobody else believes in that I do for nausea and vomiting in pregnancy, and that is I give these ladies an injection of vitamin B12 intramuscularly. I give them intravenous B6, and I get them to take a B6 tablet every day, and I'll do these injections once a week. And I usually have cured the nausea and vomiting in pregnancy 75% after the first treatment, 95% after the second treatment, and it's only rarely, including my own daughter-in-law, that had to go to a third or a fourth one. So it's largely a vitamin deficiency and B6 deficiency. Pyridoxine is the name of vitamin B6. So it's an important vitamin. And then folic, whoops, I got to go back again. Folic acid, another B vitamin, omega-3 fatty acids, vitamin D, and this other one, coenzyme Q10. We're going to talk more about that Not tomorrow. We'll probably talk about that on Saturday night. But it is a supplement that boosts our mitochondria. And the mitochondria are the powerhouses of the cell. They're what produce the energy for the cell. And one of the things we're learning right now is there are many diseases related to mitochondrial dysfunction. Our cells cannot produce enough energy, and so we develop, from chronic fatigue syndrome to fibromyalgia to people in constant brain fog, people who are struggling with these non-specific symptoms that most physicians don't have a cure for. We're finding it related to mitochondrial dysfunction. So we're going to talk more about that on Saturday night, and I'll give you a couple other suggestions. But coenzyme Q10, CoQ10, is one that boosts the mitochondria, and I am using that with children with autism spectrum disorder. I also supplement magnesium for them. I make sure they're on probiotics, and I had a question the other night about magnesium. The one magnesium form that I don't recommend, which is actually, I think is causing a little bit more harm than good, is magnesium citrate. So if you take magnesium, check the salt that it's hooked to and avoid magnesium citrate. Magnesium chloride is well absorbed through the skin. Now, Epsom salts are magnesium sulfate. And I use Epsom salts if I've worked hard outdoors, I've done a lot of physical labor and my muscles are sore, or I come in from a long tennis game, I will soak in Epsom salts bath. But magnesium flakes, magnesium chloride is better. It's absorbed better through the skin. So I tell people, make a sort of a little plastic wash basin with some magnesium salts in the magnesium flakes. And just soak your feet in them while you're watching television in the evening, or you're working on a computer or something, and you will absorb the magnesium right through your skin. You can rub it on in the form of a magnesium oil, but you can also supplement oral magnesium, but not magnesium citrate. Magnesium citrate raises your copper levels and raises your iron levels that become very difficult to get under control. So we're just avoiding that one. The other thing that we have done for autism, which is kind of exciting, is to use hyperbaric oxygen. So we put people in a high pressure oxygen environment, and we are seeing some benefits. There's several researchers who have done it. Now, hyperbaric oxygen changes things. We had a scuba diver once who got a decompression illness, which is by coming up from scuba diving too fast, and the nitrogen in the that's dissolved into the tissue starts bubbling out into the bloodstream, and you get very sick with it. It's called the bends. And so when people have that, when they're scuba diving, you take them and put them in a hyperbaric oxygen chamber. This particular person had a rather ugly cut on their leg, and we put them in the hyperbaric oxygen, and it was amazing that it healed up 3 or 4 times as fast as it did without the hyperbaric oxygen. So that when you put people in hyperbaric oxygen, it speeds up certain processes and healing processes. So it's an interesting thing that there's still research going on with. So those are the 2 disorders which we don't really understand to its full degree. Research is going on, but we're seeing an increased number of kids with these problems and adults. And we need to be looking at ways other than stimulant medications of correcting it. So that's why I try to put this whole balance in play. Any questions on that? Okay, well, we'll move on to our part 2. And part 2 is, there is no need to be afraid of God. I believe that if we are afraid of God, we have misunderstood or maybe even refused to believe that which God paid such a high price to reveal. Because even though God is infinite in majesty and power, there is nothing more that he wants of his intelligent creatures but complete freedom. He wants our love, our trust to be freely given to him. And that freedom will not exist in his family, or that love and trust will never exist in his family if there's not complete freedom. In order that the prefrontal cortex can regain control of our minds, it is necessary that there be complete freedom so that love can be the guiding principle of our minds. And God would rather die than direct a universe in which there was no freedom. God knows that if the fear center takes control of a person's mind, their obedience will be a result of that fear. And obedience out of fear turns people into rebels. And rebellion is the essence of sin. Therefore, God sent his Son to deal with sin. But first of all, in order to eliminate rebellion and mistrust, the amygdala had to be suppressed, because that's where fear originates. Fear has turned many of God's children against their Creator, and it's fear which pushes the heart towards rebellion, even the hearts of those who have tried to obey God but don't know him very well. I used to take care of a seniors' home run by some nuns in a French-speaking part of the province. And one day, a lady came up to me, and she told me, she says, "I'm afraid." I said, "You are? Do I scare you?" No, I'm not afraid of you. I'm afraid, just afraid. What are you afraid of? Well, she said, "I'm 84 years old." Okay. She said, "Well, my father died at age 85. My mother died at age 85. A brother of mine died at 85. My sister died at 85. And in a few weeks, I'm going to be 85. I said, "Are you afraid of dying?" She said, "No, I'm not afraid of dying. It's what comes after death that I'm concerned about." She said, "I talked to the priest, and I asked him, is there a hell and a purgatory?" And he said, "Oh, yes, my sister, there's a hell and a purgatory." So she says, "That's what I'm afraid about." I said, "Don't you know where you are going to go when you die?" "Well," she said, "I'm not quite so sure." So I had a nun making rounds with me that particular day, and I said, "Sister, do you have a Bible in the chapel?" She said, "Yes." I said, "Would you mind getting it for me?" So the nun went to the chapel and got the Bible, and I shared with this lady the assurances of salvation. And then I looked at the nun and I said, "Sister, I don't know how Catholic my expose is, but I just wanted to share these assurances with this lady." She said, "Oh, it's very Catholic, very Catholic." And the lady, as we finished, I looked at her and I said, "You don't need to be afraid to die, because you need to know where you're going. You need to know that you have a relationship with your Creator that's going to just carry you through once you do die." She looked at me and she says, "I want you to know that you've given me more hope than all the priests and all the nuns in 84 years. I said, "I am very pleased with that." We are afraid of these things. And so God gave his life to make it perfectly clear that there's no need for us to be afraid of God. Surely such a God who's infinite in power would go so far to just give us this demonstration is worthy of our love and trust and reverence and worship. But if God is the way his enemies have made him out to be, punishing and severe, freedom would never be possible, and every expression of love from us would be tainted by our fear. So many times the picture of God is the Nebuchadnezzar model. You remember Nebuchadnezzar, he put up this statue on the plain of Dura, and he obliged everyone to kneel down and worship the statue under the penalty of being thrown in the fiery furnace. And we sort of shudder at that story. But many of us picture God in exactly the same way, the Nebuchadnezzar model. But there's one difference, because Nebuchadnezzar was only demanding the people get on their knees and worship. He wasn't asking for them to love him. And God is asking for us to love him. And so often God has been portrayed as saying, either you love me or I'll throw you into the fiery furnace. And I'll burn you not just for a few minutes like Nebuchadnezzar did, but I'll continue to burn you through the ages of eternity. Now, how we understand the death of the enemies of God colors our understanding of God and our understanding of his plan to heal his sick and dying children. And according to our understanding, either our prefrontal cortex will have dominance and we will not be afraid, but our response will be one of love, or the amygdala will take control. It all depends on how we understand our God. Well, there are times when God has to raise his voice, and sometimes he has to shout loudly, especially when we make a lot of noise and aren't listening to him. But he shouts so he can get our attention. And sometimes God has to insist on a little bit of respect so that we will be willing to listen. We have the example that I used on Saturday morning in Exodus 20:18 through 20. It was based around the bottom of Mount Sinai. And if you were ever on the Sinai Peninsula of Egypt, it's a great experience to climb Mount Sinai and be at the top. They usually climb it so you're up there when the sun comes up. But when I climbed it, I started at sunrise, and all the camels and climbers were coming down, and I had the whole top of the mountain to myself, and that was kind of nice when I got to the top. But at Sinai, the people heard the thunder and the loud blast of the ram's horn, and they saw flashes of lightning and smoke billowing from the mountain, and they stood at a distance trembling with fear. And they said to Moses, you speak to us and we will listen, but don't let God speak to us or we'll die. Moses said, don't be afraid, for God has come in this way to test you so that your fear of him, and this is another meaning of the word fear, your love for him, your respect for him will keep you from sinning. And then as the people stood in the distance, Moses, who wasn't afraid of God, approached the dark cloud where God was. And he survived. Moses knew God, and he understood why God was raising his voice, something he had to do in order to get their attention. But his preferred method of talking with us is in the still, small whisper of a silence that he used in talking to Elijah. But we must realize that he does raise his voice sometimes when we are in danger. Suppose there's a teacher in a classroom of very rambunctious ADHD kids who are hollering and screaming. It's the day before holidays, and the kids are all excited, and suddenly the teacher realizes that the school is on fire. So what would be her most compassionate, loving way to deal with the students? Supposing she was just to say very quietly, students, the school is on fire. Please get out of the classroom. But there's so much noise, and the kids are making fuss, and they're running around, and they're laughing. that they can't hear her. So do you think it would be reasonable for that teacher to get up on a desk and bang the desk and scream, "Fire! Quiet! Get out of here right now! Fire drill time! Out the door!" Obviously. So that's the same thing with God. He likes to communicate with us quietly, and just a thought that comes into our mind. But if we're not willing to listen, if we're too busy with all the things going on in the world, if we don't respect him, he will raise his voice. But there's still no reason for us to be afraid of God. And so many times I've been, as a child and as an adult, I've been threatened with the judgment. Oh, you be careful, because one of these days you're going to face God face to face, and you will have to answer for all these things. My mother used to say, you will have to answer for every minute of your life to make sure it was well used. And I finally told my mother one day, I said, you know, you have made me a workaholic by teaching those sort of principles. There is a time to work, but there is a time to sit back and do nothing, Mother. She looked at me and she says, well, I'm sorry. So we have our next text, which says, another one that we used last Saturday morning, God is love, and all who live in love live in God. All who live in love live in God, and God lives in them. And as we live in God, our love grows more perfect, so that we will not be afraid on the day of judgment, but we can face him with confidence because we live like Jesus here in this world. So love has no fear, because perfect love expels all fear. If we're afraid, it's for fear of punishment, and it shows that we have not fully experienced his perfect love. If we know the truth about our God, there's no reason to be afraid of God, even in the final judgment. In John 16, Jesus says, then you will ask in my name. You will ask in my name. I'm not saying I will ask the Father on your behalf. For the Father himself loves you dearly because you love me and believe that I came from God. So we can address the Father directly. We don't have to go through a multitude of saints and a multitude of others, priests, pastors, other intermediaries to reach God. We can talk to him directly ourselves. Against whose accusations do we need to be defended? Does God accuse us? Remember the woman that was caught in adultery, and as all her accusers left, Jesus said, where are your accusers? They've all gone. I don't accuse you either. God doesn't accuse us. Satan accuses us. God is there to help us and pick us up and protect us and defend us from that accusation. John 3:19. And the judgment is based on this fact. God's light came into the world, but people loved the darkness more than the light, for their actions were evil. You know, the judgment is, have we regained the prefrontal cortex in control, or are we still living in fear of everything? Is love the basis which guides our lives? Or is fear the basis that guides our lives? Some people prefer the shadows to the light. They would rather be controlled by fear than to know the truth, controlled by the amygdala rather than the prefrontal cortex. They haven't changed their locus of control. John 12:47-48. I will not judge those who hear me but don't obey me. For I've come to save the world, not to judge it. But all who reject me and my message will be judged on the day of judgment by the truth that I have spoken. Once again, the truth is that we don't have to be afraid of God, that God loves us, that God is anxious to heal us from this fear that pervades our lives, and he wants to restore us back into a perfect image with him. We're judged by the truth about our God. Our condition needs to be diagnosed. Have we accepted the truth and our center of control been changed from the fear center to the prefrontal cortex? Is our life based on other-centered love, or is it based on fear. What does God do to those who reject the truth? With tears in his eyes, he leaves them to continue living the life of fear that they have chosen. And, I didn't put Romans in here. Romans 1:25-28. At the end, God, who values nothing higher than the freedom of his intelligent creatures, accepts the choices that we have made, and he sadly allows us the freedom to reap the consequences of our choices. If we continue to live by our fear center, we will remain focused on our personal interests, and we will die, for the wages of sin is death. And so in Revelation 22 says, let the one who is doing harm just continue to do harm. Let the one who is vile just continue to be vile. Let the one who is righteous continue to live righteously. Let the one who is holy continue to be holy. Total freedom to continue down the paths we have chosen. But one path leads to life and life more abundantly, and the other path leads to a life of fear, destruction, and death. Just continue to be who you are. There's no reason to be afraid of God in the judgment. We make our decisions. God respects our decisions. One day we will all come face to face with him who has made us. Whether we have changed the center of control and adopted that operating system or not, God is here with us, around us. He would love to heal us and help us redo our center of control. If we're willing and ready to listen and apply the remedy. But if we continually refuse to listen, what can he do in a universe that's completely free? But just let us go and let our choices continue to the final result. We will know the truth, and the truth will set us free. The fear of many things has pervaded our whole planet. And I'm not trying to simplify excessively this concept, but I think you can understand how this works in destroying us from the inside out. And if we are transformed from our locus of control, it makes all the difference in the world. Any questions? Tomorrow night, we're going to be looking at how to boost our immune systems, what we can do to strengthen our immune systems. And our spiritual component is going to be the abundant life, what Jesus offers to us as an abundant life. And then on Saturday morning, we're going to have a very fun, and I hope you'll find it very interesting, talk on our original glory and glory restored. Okay, a very encouraging, upbeat presentation. And in the evening, we're going to look at a summary of all the things we can do to have a perfectly healthy, dynamic, excellent mind. And we'll bring things to a close with that. Have a good night. We'll see you tomorrow, and may God bless you all.